Okay, got it. Um, Jonathan is going to be presenting today, but first of all, welcome everyone to the ULT San Diego Aquarian series. This is a series that happens every Saturday, 4:30 Pacific Standard Time. Let's see. If anyone needs to have the Aquarian Almanac, which is what this series is based upon, just comment back on the invitation that gets sent to you, and we'll be sure you get one that's free of charge. And I'm going to be chairing this meeting, as I said, because Jonathan is honoring us with a presentation, and this presentation's on nature, woman, and man. And he'll speak for about a half hour, and after that, we'll have plenty of time, hopefully, for some profound discussion and the sharing of insights. I'm going to share my screen briefly here so I can, while we're allowing more people back in that hopefully we didn't accidentally kick out. In the meantime, I'll share some of our upcoming presentations. Next Saturday, there'll be a presentation on the life and work of William Quan Judge entitled Hit the Mark. That will be March 18th at 4:30, of course, Pacific Standard Time, followed by Cyclic Evolution, and that will be on March 25th, followed by the Monadic Stream. That will be on April 1st. And then finally, Cycle of the Phoenix, which will be on April 8th. Okay, I'm going to stop share. And I am hoping everything goes well. Jonathan, do you want to take it away?
All right, let me see what I can do here.
Oh, and by the way, if everyone can mute themselves if they're not already muted, I'm going to mute myself right now.
Well, thank you, Desiree. Can everyone hear me okay? You can at least, Desiree? Good. At least I have one audience. That's good. That's all I need. Okay. So this week we will be talking about the topic of nature, woman, and man. And you may ask, well, what's a man talking about this for? And I've got a theory about that because I have a theory about everything. And in this case, I'm figuring if the theosophical teachings about reincarnation are true, and if mankind has been on this planet for 18 million years, as is outlined in the Secret Doctrine, and if there's between 1,000 and 1,500 years between lifetimes, and I've done the math on that, and most likely I have been a woman for 7,000 or 8,000 times. So, and then one time Desiree jokingly called me a grandmother trying to round up people. So as I was joking about the grandmother thing, if I've been a woman for 7,000 or 8,000 lifetimes, theoretically, half and half, then I must have been a grandmother, some huge fraction of that, if I would have lived long enough, et cetera, et cetera. So anyway, welcome everyone. And let me get to here. I just wanted to throw a little bit of shine on Maria here. She's the one creating some of these flyers now. And she chose this beautiful picture of these young people in nature. And it's very appropriate for a lot of reasons, theosophically. Let me see what the next. This quote that's here is from Hermes magazine, and the writer is pointing out that real affinities involve the most delicate tuning of the subtlest vibrations in one's being to the rhythm of the noumenal cosmos, reflected in myriad ways in visible nature. So theosophically, nature like human beings, is sevenfold. And this sentence, we think, has reference to a sentence in the Secret Doctrine on page 199, immediately prior to the famous page 200 diagram. And immediately prior to that diagram, HPB writes something very similar to what that was saying in that quote that we just read. These seven planes correspond to the seven states of consciousness in man. It remains with him to attune the three higher states in himself to the three higher planes in cosmos. But before he can attempt to attune, he must awaken the three seats to life and activity, says HPB. And so in that doctrine, in that diagram rather, there are 4 rupa planes and 3 arupa planes. And rupa means form. So it is depicting 4 planes in nature that have something to do with form, something to do with what we can get our heads around. And then there's 3 arupa planes, which are higher, and they are arupa because they are formless. And they're much more difficult to get attuned to. Now, what this is saying, though, is that there are formless planes within our own consciousness that we have to awaken so that we can become attuned to the higher planes in nature. And we don't know exactly what those planes are in consciousness, but we think it has to do with buddhi and the Atman, you could say. And buddhi has to do with discrimination and discernment spiritually. It has to do with compassion. It has to do with the experience of the reincarnating ego. And the Atmic, which is universal, has to do with synthesis. And there is an article by William Quan Judge entitled Synthesis of Occult Science. And one of the things that he points out in that article is this philosophy is not this philosophy, namely theosophy, is not simply synthetical in its methods, but it is synthesis itself. It regards nature as one complete whole. The synthesis of occult science becomes, therefore, the higher synthesis of the faculties of man. Now, so now we're talking about, once again, this idea of waking up the higher, more spiritual, divine principles in the human being. And one of the things that is required for that is kind of, I would think, it would be a return to the innocence of humanity and the innocence within ourselves, and a return to the root nature within ourselves. And this would have to do with kind of undoing the worldliness in us and healing the impurities within the brain mind, so to speak. Now, there is a book, by the way, called Nature, Man and Woman by Alan Watts. And no doubt this title is a play off of that title. And it's a good book. I have not read the entire book, but I've dipped into it in a lot of its pages. And it's very creative. And he's taking the position basically of a Taoist, talking about the yin and the yang. One of his main theses is the relationship between man and woman has a lot to do with the relationship between humanity and nature. And certainly we will be exploring that idea. But we think that theosophically has a breadth and a depth that will give us more purchase on the full volume of what kind of an Aquarian, you could say futuristic idea of nature, woman and man. Now, there are some points that I want to point out before we got into the purification of the mind that's required to really deeply approach this topic. Is I wanted to point out how in the Theosophical Glossary, it's very clear that HPB is saying that nature is feminine. For example, there's an entry in the glossary that says under Aditi Gaia, she says which is very interesting because Aditi is very abstract. It's like abstract primordial nature, and Gaia is the earth. But she puts them together here. It's a compound term, that's Sanskrit and Latin, meaning dual. Nature in Theosophical writings, it's spiritual and physical, as Gaia is the goddess of the earth and of objective nature. And here's another quote from HPB, Secret Doctrine. She says, nature is therefore feminine and to a degree objective and tangible, and the spirit principle which fructifies it is concealed. Here's an interesting quote from the Secret Doctrine. Water is the symbol of the female element everywhere. Actually, I'm going to go back to Maria's slide here. It is the universal matrix or the great deep. Also, this flyer, you can imagine the sound that these two people are listening to in this picture. They look very calm, but can you imagine almost how loud that waterfall must be? So they must have to somewhat raise their voices over it, but no doubt their voices are mingling in with the sounds that are around them, which is reminiscent of the idea that there's a keynote in nature. And there's a footnote in the Voices of Silence that reads, the northern Buddhists and all Chinamen, in fact, find in the deep roar of some of the great and sacred rivers the keynote of nature. Hence the simile. It is a well-known fact in physical science as well as in occultism that the aggregate sound of nature, such as heard in the roar of great rivers, the noise produced by the waving tops of trees in large forests, or that of a city heard at a distance, is a definite single tone of quite an appreciable pitch. So getting back into this idea of the therapeutic restoration of our own brain mind, you could say, in order to really go back home to the very depths of primordial nature. I was reminded of an article by Raghavan Iyer called Between Heaven and Earth. And in that article, he identifies 5 criteria that are healing for the brain mind in order to be able to get back to primordial nature. And the first one, he says, is reverence for the great sacrifice. Now, that's a teaching in the Secret Doctrine. It's a very mystical, spiritual teaching. And the Hierophantic host under the eternal initiator of initiates, the evergreen trees of knowledge, enlightenment, and immortality. And the way that this would manifest in our lives and in our minds is that it would show as a true reverence for nature. And this in turn reminds me of this document called The Eternal Religion that was actually found in a temple in South India, which has 500 axioms that are really mantrams. And one of them, and by the way, there's going to be an Aquarian series presentation on this document in November of this year. And one of the 500 axioms says, in reference to reverence, and then blossoms within you reverence, making you lovelier than a flower. And I just wanted to read a few readings. Here's an idea of how Judge is looking at reverence, William Quan Judge. And he's talking about, and this is from an article called Blavatskyism in and Out of Season, and he's talking about reverence for HPB, actually. And he talks about it in the negative, but gives you an idea. He says, if this were an age in the West when any respect or reverence existed as a general thing in the people, the sayings of a sage could be quoted as authority. But it is not such an age. Reverence is paralyzed for a time, and the words of a sage are of no moment as such. What then, he asks, are the right times and places, and which are out of place and time? Interesting question. How do you even approach reverence? And HPB speaks very movingly in an article called Civilization, the Death of Art and Culture, I believe. Somebody can correct me. And in that article, she says that she does acknowledge that there is such thing as ecology. And she's writing 140 years ago. And she writes very movingly about that. She says that climates are changing and the face of the whole world will soon be altered. Very interesting that she wrote this in, 140 years ago. She says, owing to the triumphant march and the invasion of civilization and nature, as well as man and ethics, is sacrificed. It's fast becoming artificial. Now, she's approaching, in my view, the defense of nature from a point of view of aesthetics and beauty and culture. I don't see that she's approaching ecology from a survival standpoint, that we've got to save the planet so that we can live. And I'm going to develop that concept in a minute, which is probably true, but that's not the approach that she's taking. She says, under the murderous hand of the pioneers of civilization, the destruction of whole primeval forests is leading up to the drying up of rivers, and the opening of the Canal of Suez has changed the climate of Egypt as that of Panama will divert the course of the Gulf Stream. Very interesting ideas. Now, I think that she would resonate to something in modern times that's referred to as reverential ecology. And it's an offshoot of what is called deep ecology. And Satish Kumar is one of the people that has advocated this idea of reverence to nature and an ecology that's based on reverence. And he says many in the environment movement are working hard to protect the planet Earth, to save the environment and conserve nature. Nonetheless, often their motivation is pragmatic, utilitarian, and anthropocentric. They say, we need to protect and manage the forest because humankind cannot survive without them. For them, survival of the human species is the central issue. This is okay as far as it goes, but ultimately it is a selfish ecology. Then he says, in place of such selfish ecology, we need to embrace reverential ecology. The urgent challenge of our time is to recognize the sanctity of all life. Selfish ecology leads to a separational worldview, whereas reverential ecology is based on a relational worldview. Very interesting. So this is just introducing this idea of reverence in relation to this topic. The second criteria that Raghavan Iyer is pointing out that will lead to a healing of the brain mind and increased porosity to the spiritual, and going home to the primeval wisdom of nature, is this idea of an adoration for archetypes. It's the ability to think abstractly and to love it. It's an adoration. So he writes, secondly, a longing for the ideal forms and archetypes, a pure love of truth, beauty, and goodness in all forms. Selfless ideation. In other words, it's not narcissistically oriented. On metaphysical paradigms, parapolitical ideals, and universal good. The agathon. Parapolitical might be universal brotherhood, solidarity of all humanity, oneness with nature, etc. I'll just show this picture while I'm reading a few readings from HPB and others. In this, one of the paradigms that Theosophy offers is the idea of man's place in nature, and that humanity is actually at the very heart of nature. So instead of humanity being this foreign artificial grafting on to Mother Earth, mind is central to all of nature, and abstract mind, you could say. And to some extent, humanity is part of mind in nature. So here's a quote from The Voice of the Silence, for example. Help nature and work on with her, and nature will regard thee as one of her creators and make obeisance. And she will open wide before thee the portals of her secret chambers, lay bare before thy gaze the treasures hidden in the very depths of her pure virgin bosom. Unsullied by the hand of matter, she shows her treasures only to the eye of spirit, the eye which never closes, the eye for which there is no veil in all her kingdoms. So, as we've said before, the environmental crisis is a crisis of aesthetics, and beauty, according to Satish Kumar again, he says, beauty is the first casualty of consumerist culture. The reason I'm showing you this slide is this is a pure virgin place in nature in Northwest Alaska that most likely a huge road is going to be built through in order to get precious minerals. And we're going to get to that in a minute. So Satish Kumar, he says, we are so obsessed with speed, quantity, and progress. The place of quality, beauty, ethics, and aesthetics has been much ignored. In order to rescue and restore aesthetics, we need to slow down. We need to develop appreciation, respect, and above all, reverence for material objects. Here's something from HPB from The Death of Art and Civilization. In scenery, the picturesque and the natural is daily replaced by the grotesque and the artificial. Scarce a landscape in England, but the fair body of nature is desecrated by the advertisements of Pear's soap and Beecham's pills. So she's taking names there. She's going after somebody. But she's talking about the fair body of nature. And then she writes further in the same article, she talks about the eye of the painter. So she's approaching this thing from an aesthetic point of view, which is really, it's not just aesthetic, I don't think she's referring to just what looks pretty, even though what we're looking at is quite beautiful. She's talking about the aesthetics of all 7 principles and attunement and alignment. Now she's talking about the eye of the painter. And once that every natural spot in the surrounding scenery is gone, and the eye of the painter finds but the artificial and hideous products of modern speculation to rest upon, artistic taste will have to follow suit and disappear along with them. So now I'm going to tell you about this project here. There's several projects in mind, and they all have to do with mining of precious minerals for cell phone batteries, for electric cars. And there are some in Africa like this. There are some in Argentina like this. There are places like Tibet like this. And in Northwest Africa, where they're digging huge holes in the earth in order to get all the minerals. Here, let me scroll through this thing and find out. I'll tell you which minerals they are. Here's an article in a popular magazine. And this is being written from the perspective of a person who is really on the side of developing new technologies so that we can get away from fossil fuels. But it's breaking his heart. And he writes this article. He says, before we can quit fossil fuels, we need to ratchet up supplies of raw materials for green economy essentials, such as EV batteries, charging stations, solar panels, and wind turbines. Chief among those materials are copper, lithium, cobalt, zinc, tin, silver, and graphite. The demand for copper, cobalt, zinc, silver, and lithium will increase by 500% by the year 2050, etc. Oh, here we go. Specifically with reference to this picture, the Ambler Road, which is this road that's going to go through this valley. It's going to cross 11 major rivers in Alaska and thousands of streams, potentially devastating fish habitats and disturbing fragile tundra wetlands. Ungodly amounts of gravel will have to be drawn from rivers and stream beds all along the road to support bridges, machinery, fuel depots, and culverts, not to mention the road itself. Construction will inevitably send debris into local waterways, as will use of the road, with small amounts of ore spilling out along the 211-mile road, with more than 160 trucks traversing the road every day for decades. Even little bits of spillover multiplied over time will go a long, dreadful way. And then there are the migrating caribou of the Western Arctic herd. They usually travel at night, putting them at risk of being killed, or perhaps more damaging, forcing a shift in their migratory behavior. So you can multiply that by Tibet, different pristine areas in Africa, in other parts of Asia, North and South America. They're even thinking of vacuuming the ocean floors, because the top 6 inches of the ocean floors has all kinds of much needed materials for batteries and cell phones. And you can just imagine the siltation in the ocean and the ruining of the life of the ocean if that happened. But the fact that they're contemplating it. Anyway, so that's kind of covers my section on reverence, really, for nature, that it has to be, and also the idea of the aesthetic and the idea of beauty, and that the yearning for beauty has to be part of the dialogue because it has to do with the sevenfold nature of humanity and nature together. Now, another part of one of these archetypes, as I was saying, is that man's position in nature and the idea of mind in nature. Here's an interesting video. It'll speak for itself. This is the famous experimentation of this scientist in Japan who put rice in water in 3 flasks and then experimented kind of a thought experiment. What would happen to these 3 flasks depending on what he thought about what was in the contents.
Emoto has conducted another interesting experiment. He placed rice into 3 glass beakers and covered it with water. And then every day for a month, he said, "Thank you" to one beaker, "You're an idiot" to the second, and the third one he completely ignored. After 1 month, the rice that had been thanked began to ferment, giving off a strong, pleasant aroma. The rice in the second beaker turned black, and the rice that was ignored began to rot. Dr. Emoto thinks that this experiment provides an important lesson, especially with regard to how we treat children. We should take care of them, give them attention, and converse with them. Indifference does the greatest harm.
Tell some dreamy story, but almost.
It's a popular video that's going around, and it only takes an hour to I mean, only a minute to watch it, really. And it's the interesting conclusion, not that we're saying that this is huge science or anything, but first of all, a lot of people have tried it, and with very similar effects. And you can find not only this man, who is kind of the pioneer of this experiment, but all kinds of people are trying it. And you can find them on YouTube as well. And it's very much duplicatable, where the kinds of thoughts that we send out into nature they have an effect. And the other conclusion that's so interesting is neglect, and that it's the worst possible thing that you can do. And this, of course, this man is saying that's in relation to children, but isn't that really true in any kind of a relationship? Because all relationships have to do with our relationship with nature, as Alan Watts is saying, but also especially as Theosophy is saying. Let me see where I'm at here. Now, there is a third criteria, and this could be controversial, but there is the idea that in our Western society, especially in what you call it, the sexual revolution of the 70s, that our whole society actually kind of has sex on the brain. And in order to kind of transcend the brain and to heal the brain, really, there is this notion, especially in Eastern philosophy, that sexuality isn't an absolute essential. And of course, this is, everybody's different. So there's, 8 billion people on the planet, so there's going to be 8 billion true approaches to this. But let me first just read this. Thirdly, an innate conviction, regardless of culture, that the sexual act is sacred. So that's the idea of the brahmacharya. It isn't necessarily abstaining. It could be that, or it could not be that, but it's the main idea that the sexual act is sacred. And here's something very interesting theosophically. The lesser mysteries of Eros must mirror the pristine light of the Logos, invoked through sound and silence in the greater mysteries. I won't try and explain that, but that's something to think about. And I think some of that meaning will unfold in some of these future slides. Let me go back to where it says play here. Oh, up there, play. There's an interesting book that came out about 50 years ago. I think this was 1980. And it's by Dr. Gabrielle Brown. And it's called The New Celibacy. So it's not in reference to the old monastic orders and vows of celibacy. She's just observing a new phenomenon of that a lot of people are realizing the sex is not necessary, at least at the physical level. And her subtitle is Why More Men and Women Are Abstaining from Sex and Enjoying It. And she talks about relationships and love and intimacy. And she goes through all these different kinds of loves. She explores Maslow, self-sufficiency, and functioning on the basis of being needs as opposed to deficiency needs. She talks about romantic love, all these different levels. And her main point here is that they can actually there's dialogue in Plato in the symposium, I think, where there's different people are proclaiming different kinds of love. And her point, one of her points, is that it's from the vantage point of celibacy that a person can look back at the other shore, so to speak, and have more objectivity about all the different kinds of loves and relationships that there are. Here's a quote from B.P. Wadia, who is a writer in the ULT in the middle part of the last century. And he writes that the human sex relationship that first developed at the midway point of evolution, some 18 million years ago, is itself only a microcosmic reflection of the divine act of creation. The two-sexed races who knew themselves to be descended from the androgyne forefathers and to whom I can't read that because of this, I'm going to go out of this here. I'm going to have to read it like this. To whom their own just developed sex polarity and power of procreation were sources of pure and reverent wonder, such symbols as the lingam and the yoni were as pure as the act itself. So that there's this innocent approach to all these things. And in India, you'll find in temples an honoring of the sacredness of the human body and of creation, and how all these activities are mirrorings of cosmic creativity. Let's see here. I'm going to go back to play. Here's a quote from the Mahatma letters from Mahatma M. He writes, okay, I think I've got something else in front of my screen now. I can't seem to get rid of all these things that are in the way of me reading. So I'm going to have to go back.
Jonathan,
Yeah.
do you want someone else to read it?
Yeah, let's do that. That's a really good idea. Is that you, Donna?
Yes.
Okay.
Do you want to make it a little bigger again?
Yeah, go for it.
Expansion and fundication. In cosmogony and the work of nature, the positive and the negative, or the active and passive forces, correspond to the male and female principles. The active is attracted by the passive principle, and the great Nag, the serpent emblem of the eternity, attracts its tail to its mouth, forming thereby a circle, cycles in eternity. In that incessant pursuit of the negative by the positive, the one and chief attribute of the universal spiritual principle, the unconscious but ever active life giver, is to expand and shed. That of the universal material principle, to gather in and fecundate. Unconscious and non-existing ones separated, they become conscious and life. They become consciousness and life when brought together. Hence again, Brahma, from the root Bri, the Sanskrit for to expand, grow, or fructify. Brahma being but the vivifying, expansive force of nature in its eternal evolution. Mahatma, yeah.
Oh, thank you, Donna. That's just an example of how human relationships, even human sexuality is really a mirroring of the cosmic. I think that I'll skip this one because it kind of repeats what the Mahatma had already said. And, oh, Monica, would you mind reading this one here? If you can see it on your screen.
Yes, I can see. The potency of tapas, sexuality in the classical Hindu conception is bound up with the entire person. It is a sacred language which cannot be severed from the total state of selfhood. All energies are distinguished by their expansive or constrictive operation and by the motive which directs them. Intelligently directed, they manifest at lower levels of heterogeneity their ideal counterparts. Man seeks to reverse this process so as to realize blissful reunion with the divine. This requires a sacrifice of temporal and spatial identity for a greater self-reference, which is unconfined by form and place. But energy must be refined within the alembic of pure vision and constant aspiration if it is to be alchemized. When the power of love is dissipated through indulgence in insatiable desire, the transformation cannot occur. Shiva, the regenerator, the greatest lover, and the sovereign ascetic, redeems all beings with unbounded compassion because he is attached to no particular form. He is the master of tapas, self-conquest through meditation. Sri Raghavan Iyer.
Thank you, Mano, very, very much. It all has to do with energies, spiritual energies. But the main thing, the main takeaway is that the idea is that sexuality is sacred. It means something. It has to do with, cosmic creativity. Now, this next criteria about kind of purifying what he's calling the brain mind is this idea of devotion and kind of developing a sense of the sacred. And we think that Theosophy is very much doing that, even though it has a lot to do with what is called Jnana Yoga, which has to do with developing the mind and using the mind and learning how to think. ultimately, in the sub background, there's this kind of divine ground of devotion and developing a sense of the sacred in theosophy. And in this paragraph, it reads, fourthly, there is devotion, the only feeling natural to the hearts of men and women of all races, common to the human babe and the young of animals. Devotion, understood rightly, shows in the rishis and sages, as well as in a child's simplicity, which coexists with authentic solemnity and inner depth. Inherent in the human heart is the ever-present sense of the sacred. And here's a couple of quotes from Secret Doctrine. Desiree, can you see those? Do you mind reading them?
The religion of nature. No human-born doctrine, no creed, however sanctified by custom and antiquity, can compare in sacredness with the religion of nature. The Secret Doctrine, Volume 2, page 201. And the religion of humanity. The silent worship of abstract or noumenal nature, the only divine manifestation, is the one ennobling religion of humanity. Also, the Secret Doctrine, Volume 1, page 381.
This is kind of this idea of devotion and sense of the sacred. And here's something from Raghavan Iyer. And Truth, can you see that, or are you at work?
No, I could read that.
Okay.
Sanctity. We must live as if there is a tremendous sanctity to everything we touch. Bathing is a sacrament. Eating is sacred. Sharing the presence of other human beings is a privilege. These are among the forgotten truths which need to be rekindled in contemporary society. The innate decencies of ancient cultures can be brought into a vibrant conception of soul civility in daily life. The Candle of Vision, Hermes, July 1977, Raghavan Iyer.
Thank you very much for that. And the last criteria is this idea of recognizing the human body as a temple and not a tomb of the pilgrim soul in every person. And so in other words, it's a whole different approach to what the human body even is and what it is for. Yes, you could think of it as a corpse. There is such thing as corpse meditation and so forth in different branches of things. But ultimately, it is the human body is a temple, and it is to be seen as this incredible masterpiece of evolution over millions of years, all for the purpose of the human pilgrimage, which is a sacred endeavor. And Desiree, would you mind staying with your Secret Doctrine vibe here?
Certainly. The one temple. There is but one temple in the universe, and that is the body of man. Nothing is holier than that high form. We touch heaven when we lay our hand on a human body. If well meditated, it will turn out to be a scientific fact, the expression of the actual truth of the thing. We are the miracle of miracles, the great inscrutable mystery. The Secret Doctrine, Volume 1.
Sorry about that.
No problem.
I didn't mean to cut you off. And then there's this quote from Thomas Carlyle where he just exclaims, he says, this body, these faculties, this life of ours, is it not all as a vesture for the unnamed? He's just in wonder about this whole life, this whole thing. I mean, every once in a while, we all kind of arrive at that point, it's just the magnificence of it all. And I think that was my last slide. And I'm kind of ran over time, partly because I might have over-prepared, partly because of my technology issues. And I'm going to do a stop share. And Desiree, take it away.
Thank you so much for that presentation, Jonathan. I've got my little notes here, but I'm going to open it up for any comments and discussion going forward for at least the next 30 minutes. So does anyone have anything to share or question to ask? Jonathan's here to help us all out. Anybody?
I see a hand from Judy.
Okay, Judy, go for it.
Well, thank you. for a very wonderful, inspiring presentation. Jonathan, there was so much to talk about, but I wanted to talk about reverential ecology. It seems that just about anything we want to do with the earth now we want to change to a more electrical energy, but we have to mine for that. So that's going to harm the earth. Chlorofluorocarbons harm the earth and even our food supply. So it doesn't seem, what way is there out? Do we ask the earth, how do we live from you? Do we go back to the clipper ship? And instead of the steam ship, do we go back to the horse and buggy? That's the Amish solution. It seems that living as human beings on this planet is becoming increasingly greedy in spite of an attempt to save the planet, and increasingly difficult. So maybe we need to go and ask the earth what the solution is, because the earth really is because of us. Can you answer that? I don't know if anyone can really.
You got something, Desiree, or? I could say,
that's a good point. But the thing is, we knew that this would happen, because if we just turn south to the maquiladoras in Mexico, we knew that where the U.S. was taking batteries and tearing them apart and putting all of those minerals, those toxins into the water supply, and these poor villages that didn't have a voice, and they ended up with all of these stillbirths and deformities because of it. So it's not like we're dealing with a science that was not known. And so where I'm coming from is that we allow, corporate America and ourselves too, because we have a role in this, to only think 2 or 3 steps into the problem and then stop the minute it becomes a little inconvenient. And this is one of the problems I think we're going to be facing as we try to find that tricky balance between meeting our needs that we need to survive, and not, creating this really abusing nature. So there's a balance there. I mean, we need to survive, but what do we do to survive? We consume. And we don't need all that consumption. So I think that's one thing that I think in this Aquarian age, especially with the young people coming in, they're moving into the space where there are certain things that society is telling them they need, and they're saying, no, I don't. So I'm glad to see that we're evolving in the right direction, but evolution is an up and down process. So anyway, I just wanted to make mention of that, because we do know that there's dangers in what we are doing. So even though we try to do things safely that don't have that much of an impact, we do. I mean, I don't know exactly what the answer is either, but believe you me, when we went to electric cars, what are we doing with the batteries? Every time we have a solution, there's a problem to that solution. So we have to keep asking ourselves, what are the consequences of our action? And don't just stop when it becomes inconvenient, but keep pushing. I don't know if that helps.
Thank you.
Thank you, Desiree. I had one also thought. It seems that whenever we're thinking that the means justifies the ends, that there's inherent violence built into that. And thinking of nature and the earth as a being, like the questioner suggested, that we should ask, perhaps that will make it so that we're not, because there's a certain almost rapaciousness built into the idea of the ends justifies the means, isn't there? So by asking Mother Earth, and I think, Desiree, what you already just said about making it so we're less consumers, you can always become relatively less. But Anyway, that was just another thought.
And also, I think it's the saying should not be the ends justifies the means. It should be the means substantiates the ends.
Yeah, so for mining out of the earth, that doesn't sound like the means are substantiating the ends. Anyway.
Okay, well, Jim and Michelle, I don't know if it's Jim or Michelle. Your next step. What's your question or comment?
Wonderful presentation, Jonathan. Very exceptionally brilliant. I really appreciated how you brought up those 5 criteria. And I'm wondering, it seems that your whole approach to this subject has been kind of restoring a certain kind of mental posture. And I'm from the article that you referenced from HPB, Civilization, the Death of Art and Beauty. It's really interesting how she's linking up a direct relationship between the thoughts of men and the devastation of certain rivers and different parts of nature. And I'm wondering if we approach the environmental problems that we have today, do you think that only, because we tend to think just on the physical plane, and I'm curious if you think that I guess if we start from the mind, if we purify our mental and emotional state within an individual and link up with nature, do you think that this will actually reflect in nature? Is this perhaps a missing solution to the whole environmental crisis?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I think that's what the whole second volume of The Secret Doctrine is about. It is putting human beings in nature, because it's ostensibly titled anthropogenesis, but I think it's really about the role of the Manasa and the gratitude that we have for the Manasa Putras, and fundamentally what it is to be a human being, and that human beings are here for a reason. And we can begin to actually uplift nature. And interestingly, if that experiment has any truth to it, about the 3 flasks and the fellow, thinking good thoughts and then bad thoughts and then not even thinking at all about the third one, that the implications of that is that if theoretically humanity just left the planet, and if we pulled an Elon and all got on board spacecraft and went to Mars or did whatever, according to that experiment, whatever credibility that one could have in that actually nature would implode. And there is kind of a mantra in theosophy: nature unaided fails, interestingly enough. Now that has all kinds of dimensions, but so even with humanity's poor thoughts and abusive thoughts and so forth, it's better than nothing that human beings are here, that it's theosophically. And but I think that what you said about a mental posture of reverence, a sense of the sacred, devotion, understanding the sacredness of the human body, and therefore the sacredness of all of nature, would begin to heal our whole civilization.
Mm-hmm.
And that HPV isn't in that article. She's not saying, hey, we better get our act together. We're all going to wipe out, or we're all going to die, or the world's going to end in 10 years. She's more saying it's more of a heart response. So that seems to be her way of eliciting this mental posture that you must be referring to.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Laura, you had your hand up. Do you still want to ask a question, or?
Well, it's hard to sometimes, I want to hear what everyone else is saying, and I sometimes my thought fades in the background. But one of the things that comes to mind in listening is that the reason we need to have cell phones and the internet is because we think we're separate. And if we can purify the mind and heart, we will discover that there's an inner connection of communication between us, and we don't need these external things. In the long run, when we reach the next race, these things won't be needed. That sort of came to mind. And the other was how the quotes that were mentioned, Jonathan, how they really are a good description of the diagram that starts Judge's Bhagavad Gita, the picture of Krishna, the male and the female, the spirit and the matter is together in each one of us. And that's something else too. Once we unite those two things within ourselves, then we can help nature in that regard, it seems, as well.
I got a question for Laura. Some people think that diagram has to do with chapter 11, and we happen to be in chapter 11 in our Yoga Gita group. Do you think that there's anything about chapter 11 that has reference to our topic today?
Well, from what just was said there, it seems that when we can see both spirit and matter within ourselves, when we can harmonize that and take the position, I think that's what seems to be coming out in chapter 11, is that we've spent a lot of time on theory. We've spent a lot of time understanding how the cosmos works. And now it seems chapter 11 is about getting in the car and starting to drive it from that position of the higher rather than from the lower. That's what comes to mind.
Yeah. Thank you.
They're going to kill it here in the gallery.
Desiree, do you want to, we got Ken over here. He's raising his hand here in the lodge. Or what do you want to do?
Go for it, Ken.
All righty.
Why don't you just get up here and.
Okay. Unless you can hear me okay from here, or let me go to the camera. I'm sorry, we got the camera thing. One thing from this idea of reverential ecology that was mentioned was the idea of the anthropocentric or the human-centric, that we focused on our species, but we're not the only species on the planet that has an advanced brain. In terms of just a physical species with brains, there's like dolphins and whales and things like that. And then you can say there's been some research lately pointing to the distributed kind of neural interconnections of groves of trees. So it could be that if we think of the manas of the biosphere, of all of the life forms on our planet being primarily in us, or we think it's primarily in us as our human species, that's what's going on at the moment, but it maybe doesn't have to stay that way. And perhaps the torch of civilization, as it's gone from, say, the Middle East with their astrolabes and astronomy, or in China with their sort of stuff, and then gone to Rome and Europe, in terms of the torch of civilization, perhaps the manas and the biosphere will move out of our species and into a different species. And so if we have reference for life in general, or for the biosphere in general, I think that's another approach to reverential ecology, because to be anthropocentric is yet another stand of the ego, of egotism and self-centeredness from a species standpoint. And, coupled with that is the idea that one guy at Harvard, a biologist, was saying that there's several species per hour that are going extinct because of our human activities. And that's rather shocking. and that the cradle of our biosphere, the womb, if you will, are rainforests and coral reefs. And our human activity is having and has had for decades now, 50 years at least, rather damaging effect on those two wombs of biodiversity on our planet, namely the rainforests and the coral reefs. So I think adopting a reverential ecology perspective is going to be very important as we move forward into the Aquarian age. Thanks.
Thanks, Ken. I have a kind of a question and observation. There's a new ecofeminism going around. I don't know if it's new or not, but where they're studying the relationship between the treatment of women and its connection to the way we treat the earth. And basically, the thesis is that when you treat, let's see if I can come up with it, that when we don't value women on our earth or the earth, that both suffer. And I think it has something to do with just the fact that women are often seen in this kind of oppressive way as an object of the man. And I think this kind of was Christianized over the time when, she was basically formed out of his rib, which has a much higher and archetypal meaning. But when we accept it as, in this kind of dead letter way, it really almost gives legitimacy to this oppressive treatment of not just women, but it's like it leads to racism and homophobia, xenophobia. I mean, it's just all these phobias that seem to trail from it. And I'm just wanted to get your kind of input on this relationship between the way women are treated and how that's connected with the way the earth's treated. Jonathan?
Well, I agree with the thesis of the question.
Ecofeminism.
Oh, let me take a detour for a minute, and then so I don't have to hide under the furniture. I want to talk about Vandana Shiva, and she is considered to be kind of one of the world's premier ecofeminists. And she's absolutely full on, ridiculously brilliant. And she's got her PhD in either philosophy or physics, but she's a genius at both. And she goes around the world talking about seeds and the importance of seeds and farmers. And Monsanto, which is now Bayer, Bayer, see, I called out a name. And they are buying all the seeds from all the farmers in India, and then they're selling seed back to the farmers that is sterile, that only has one crop. So they've made it so that many of the farmers in India are based on this, are dependent on Monsanto Bayer now. And hundreds of thousands of farmers have committed suicide because of this. Not just 10, but hundreds of thousands, apparently. And so she's going to bat for these farmers. And she's just raising awareness throughout the world based on that. And my understanding is that she is adored around the world as a feminist also. So it isn't just the ecology, is that because nobody is smarter than her, period. And so some people think of her as Durga, okay, which is one of the Shaktis of Shiva. And Shiva, we can remember, is the good gardener in nature. So that's how much she's adored and revered, is that people think that she's, Durga and so forth. But getting back to your question, I think you're right. And that is the thesis of Alan Watts. And that's what he's talking about in his book, Nature, Man and Woman. Notice that this title is a little bit more female-centric, you could say. Interesting metaphysically, and you, Desiree, have one of the most metaphysical minds that I even know of. The HPB and the Secret Doctrine says that really the first conceivable metaphysical reality that can even be thought of is the feminine. So it's like the primary basis of everything, you could say. And she's getting us away from the old man in the sky theory, right? Just right off the bat, that the most primordial, highly sublime reality that can possibly thought of, that first radiates from the absolute, you could say, Malaprakriti, root nature, root matter. That is the abstract feminine. That is a total reset, I think, theosophically. And it probably will work its way into the culture, perhaps. But I'm sure that other people will have a lot more practical answers to this. And I do see a hand from
Wes?
Yeah.
Hi, Wes.
But we'll let him talk anyway.
Go ahead, Wes.
You'll have to unmute yourself.
Wes, I'm not sure, we can't hear you. You are unmuted, but there's something else. We just can't hear you.
Maybe Monica could ask her question until Wes is able to fix his microphone.
Oh, I think it.
Can you hear me now?
Oh, there we go. There we go.
Okay, sorry. The mic wasn't on. I was wondering what her name was again.
Oh, Vandana Shiva.
Spell that slowly for me, please.
And Vandana, I don't know if Shobha's here, but she knows what Vandana means. But it's Vandana, V-A-N-D-A-N-A.
V-A-N-D.
A-N-A.
N-A. Vandana. Okay.
Yep. And then Shiva. You can find her on
S-I-V-A.
S-H-I-V-A. And she's on YouTube and she's fascinating. You could binge watching her all night.
Okay, thank you.
Nice to hear from you, Julie.
Monica, did you have some?
Thank you.
Actually, everybody answered a little bit of it, so I'm good. Thank you very much.
Okay, well, if there are no more comments or questions, I just want to thank Jonathan for his wonderful presentation and for allowing me to be part of it as the feminine half of the group.
No, Indra has her hand up. I wonder.
Oh, I'm sorry, Indra. Go for it.
It's really Diane.
Oh, Diane.
You're muted. I think you're muted. There you go.
I'm sorry.
If you were talking to me, I just wanted to thank Jonathan and Desiree. So I just didn't mean to ask a question.
Hi. I just wanted to wish Vicky a happy birthday. That's all.
Oh.
How about that? Happy birthday, Vicky.
Happy birthday, Vicky.
Hey, Vicky.
Thank you, everybody. It's interesting getting old. It's not a bad thing. It's just a fascinating thing.
There you go.
We aren't getting old. We're getting more mature.
Beautiful.
I think I'm just getting a more intimate relationship with gravity.
That's lovely. That's a good one.
Okay, well, everybody, thanks again, Jonathan. And everybody have a wonderful evening and take care and peace be with you.
Good night.
Good. Love and peace,
Night.
everybody. Be
Thank you
well
very
and
much.
safe.
Thank
Thanks,
you
everybody.
so much, Jonathan.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
everyone. Great class. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Take
Bye-bye.
care.
Bye-bye.